Robert Moore gave man a map for the inner walk we avoid and the courage we need to grow. The aim is generative adulthood, to become whole persons whose power blesses others and serves the community. In Moore's language, drawn from decades of work in comparative myth, religion, and psychology, the psyche carries four deep structures of the mature masculine: king, warrior, magician, and lover. Parallel patterns are described for the feminine too, replacing king with queen. A mature magician is a technician of power who shares his knowledge to heal and initiate the community. The magician holds our intellectual and intuitive powers, but without the king's ordering center, the warrior's grounded courage, and the lover's embodied play, it splits into shadow forms. We get clever, distant, innocent sounding, and unavailable. The result is disappearance, a going away from relationships and from life. In the next piece, you'll hear more name that move directly. How a man cuts off his royal and warrior energies and vanishes into the magician. The partner can feel she's facing an android, not a person she can meet. Most fights aren't about the surface. Small quarrels carry big meanings we should reflect on and identify. Overwhelming moments of conflict tempt us to disappear, but the work is to stay. Protect your heart so you can keep your mind present, so you can listen under fire, even if it's only 5 or 10% of the incoming. Treat conflict as alchemical hit. Warrior holds the line, king orders repair, lover keeps the bond, then take the 10% that is true and act on it today. This is the passage from defensive masculinity to generative masculinity. Generative men use power to empower, take delight in strengthening others, and can stay present enough to hear where they're blind and do something about it. With that frame, let's step in and practice. Protect the heart, stay in the room, and listen for the gold.
One thing a lot of us guys do, and I'll just cop to this for myself, there are a lot of guys that just cut off any of their royal and warrior stuff and just don't show it. They take refuge in the magician sort of lover sector of the psyche. I'm not saying this is you. But I'm just saying that instead of ever developing the ability to be in a confrontation with another person, not just women, but to be in that confrontation without being homicidal, and being in that confrontation without really making oneself suicidal by not protecting oneself. There are a lot of guys who cut the whole active aspects of the male self off in order to survive. And what they will do is what I did for many years is I would just sort of be like the Wizard of Oz, and I would just disappear into that magician. Nothing can enrage a woman more than she's trying to confront the man, trying to engage him, and he sort of suddenly she notices, this thing sitting here with me is not really him. This is an android. That guy put an android in here to deal with me. I'm not kidding you. And often they could not articulate that I just said, but they think this is not a real person. And so then they'll start to escalate their attacks to see if this thing can sustain some punishment or whether they will crack and the real guy will step out. So a lot of us become opaque and we are not visible. When I did the Mankind Project weekend and I was asked to choose a name, an animal name, I chose President Lion, because in so much of my life I have been opaque and not present, not accessible behind my magician capacities. Oh, you have a problem? I don't understand. So I'm not saying that's you, but I'm saying it is possible to be so conflict averse that you don't put anything out there of your true self that might lead somebody to want to bump up against you. Yeah. And we call that, in psychoanalysis, when we handle things that way, we call it the false self system. Men would rather fight a whole division of enemy tanks than to deal with an enraged woman that they're in an intimate relationship with. In fact, that's why they're so eager to go off to war a lot of the time. because one of the great, realities about men of our day is how terrified they are of women when the women have some power and some strength and hurl the lance of the woman's truth, her truth, at us. And I've mentioned a couple of times John Lee's work. He's constantly pointing out the way in which we men, when the woman in our life, whoever the most special woman in our life is, begins to criticize, John points out that we almost always start declining in age. And fairly quickly, we're 3 years old. We're just shrinking and terrified. And this at the point, where domestic violence from the male side starts is when the man loses connection with his grown-up personality. And in the face of the criticism coming from a woman that's got some firepower, which is all of them, when it's coming at him, he is immobilized very often until the point where the rage kicks in, and then he will become often physically violent. So that physical violence comes out of a man who's collapsing into his weakness and self-doubt. So I'll spend a good deal of time with men trying to help them learn that if you're going to maintain a relationship with a woman, and this would be true for gay lovers as well, when your partner starts to come at you, as they inevitably will, with disappointment and displeasure, I try to tell men, you need to have your heart protected here. I'll say, you need to do a little active imagination, visualizing a little Kevlar suit. You know what Kevlar is? That's bulletproof, that you button up in. Because if you leave your heart uncovered when the lances are being thrown with great force and accuracy to get your attention, then you will regress and you will not be able to function cognitively. In other words, you will not be able to listen. Now, we would like to think that all of the lances that are thrown our way are, as Parsifal kind of feels, this is, what do you say, unjust treatment? What is the word?
Unjust.
Yeah.
And God than night.
Yes. And of course, when the salvos start to come, there is a lot of wrong stuff in it. But that's not the most important part of what's in it. If a man is actually going to do his shadow work, then he needs to practice on being able to prevent himself from dying in the face of this onslaught, having his heart completely broken, so he has to end the relationship. I always say to a man, protect your heart or you will end the relationship. You don't protect your heart, you will end the relationship. It may take you a while, depending on how masochistic you are, but you will end the relationship. But protect your heart not so you do not feel anything. You'll be feeling plenty with that Kevlar over your heart. You'll feel plenty. I just don't want you to be in such death pain that you cannot think and listen. A lot of the research now shows that when the fear comes up and the anxiety comes up, the actual brain circuits to the ears shut down. Have you ever thought when people kind of get hot at each other that you've noticed they don't listen? Well, now the neurophysiologists have actually proven that that's the case. So we need to keep you protected enough at your heart level so that your brain does not shut down. And Parsifal at this point then, you know that point you made about the transpersonal knowledge? So here's the feminine aspect of the unconscious being danced out by this crone. And the deepest part of the feminine is going to have the deepest awareness of the male shadow. Just as you will often have more awareness of the woman's shadow than she does. So there's some male part of you that is aware of the woman's shadow, often much more than she is, and often much more than her therapist is aware of it. So the key issue here is being able to continue to listen, because if he cannot listen for the truth in that salvo, even if it's only 10% or 5% of the incoming, then he is not being aided in doing his shadow work and learning where he's blind. So this is really hard thing for men. Here we see this young guy. This is heavy artillery coming at him here from the deep, dark feminine. But a number of you pointed out that this Kundry, she's pretty accurate about a lot of stuff. She is not pulling her punches, though. And I would wonder if any of you have noticed that the female of our species, when angry, will often not hold anything back. In other words, the attack will often be extremely ferocious and listing the litany of the things from the past, as you were saying, which was really right. And so it's a huge male achievement to be able to maintain the critical listening, to listen for the gold in there, in those comments, in that attack, for him to be able to see where is she right about this. It's horrific to me how often the women in my life, while overdoing the attack, have been pointing to things that I desperately needed to know, but could not know at the time. See, so I think there's the gold in this piece of the story for us. We don't have to say, well, boy, she was very balanced in what she said to him, because the force was not. I mean, this was full on. So it's not, well, now I can kick somebody's ass as a martial artist. Now I've got a warrior inflation. Well, you've got an important part. But when you're standing in a relationship with a really angry woman, then we will find out how well your warrior's initiated. If you're not aware of where your hidden grandiosity is, then your trickster isn't working. In fact, if you're not very aware of it, your trickster is very likely to start working automatically and compulsively. If you don't know where your grandiosity tends to sneak in, you're very likely to really screw up in a big way soon. And that will be the trickster operating compulsively. The goal, however, is to have the trickster operate not compulsively, but have it operating consciously in an integrated way. Well, what could that be? Well, one of the most important things is to understand that, and here's the important point here. If you're giving your power away, the job of the trickster is to find out where it is that you're doing this and to interrupt it. And I want to talk about that just for a minute. I've put up here idealization and disempowerment. There's this thing in psychoanalysis we talk about as idealizing transferences. Whenever you notice yourself being less powerful, less competent, less able to think on your feet, less able to function, feeling scattered, disoriented, and so forth with other people, you're giving your power away. You're in the midst of a compulsive idealization of the person or persons you are with. It's very important to understand this. Just monitor yourself. Notice when you start feeling small, helpless, stupid, you can't get your mind to work, immobilized. When you're feeling that way in the presence of other people, you're involved in an idealizing projection, idealizing transference in which you're not really aware of. It's very compulsive. And what has to happen is that must be broken up, because that's fraudulent. You have to take your power back. But you can't take your power back unless this trickster function comes to your aid and exposes this. In pre-modern cultures, this was always institutionalized because they had more wisdom about this than we did. They would always have the jester at the court of the king. The Joker wasn't just a film character, in other words. It was something you welcomed in all the time because you knew if you didn't have the jester there that the king was going to forget he's human. Well, if your trickster, if your inner joker is not working, you're going to be giving your power away right and left to men and women. That is, when you get to giving your power away, this is an enchantment. This has to be disenchanted. There are important things for a grown-up to do. And if all the power is being given away, one is disempowered and is in fact still emotionally a child. So you see how this works? Part of the disenchantment is to get past the denial of the social situation and so on. But another important part of the disenchantment is to get yourself out of the enchantment that is taking away your power. Children appropriately give away their power to their parents, who are supposed to hold it for them until they can receive it back at a phase-specific rate. Parents are to steward this king and queen transference. The problem is, most of us have had the experience of child parents who didn't really know what to do with all that idealization and handled it poorly. And that creates adults who are the same. And now you have them as your bosses, your executives that you work with, other people in your institutions. It's always interesting to me when I run into persons who are surprised when their superiors do not relate to them in an empowering way. It tends to be more the rule rather than the exception, even in places where you would think that would not be the case, religious communities, etc. But it's really fairly widespread. Giving away one's power is a mark of a lack of initiation. It is certainly a mark of lack of initiation in the magician. Because if your trickster is functioning, it will expose that. You will get at least a sense of humor about it, and you'll bring it back. Doesn't mean they're going to like it. Understand that. People always can tell when the idealization has been stopped. So I talked a little bit about the film Batman. You should see that if you haven't, because it really gets at this trickster material. You can really think about the Joker as Batman's shadow. And the dead giveaway on that, if you haven't seen that, see this film, because the dead giveaway is that here comes Batman. He's flying along in his high-tech airplane, you know. All this firepower comes out of the side, you know, and the Joker is standing down there with his pistol. Batman comes soaring over Gotham City and makes a flourishing sweep, and he comes, that doesn't sound grandiose, does it? And he comes sweeping down, and he gets him in his sights, and he starts to fire on the Joker and all these machine guns can't seem to kill the Joker, right? It's kind of hard to hit the trickster. Hard to get him in your sights. But the Joker raises his pistol up, fires one shot, and shoots down Batman's plane. Think about that. That's the role of the Joker. That's what the Joker is for in your psyche. It's to shoot you down when in your adolescent grandiosity, you are not really grounded. You do not realize the way in which you're responsible for not engaging the things you need to engage. So that's just the Joker bringing Batman down to earth a little bit.
where they can be engaged, where there can be a real engagement. And this is very basic magician stuff. And so if you haven't seen that film, look at that and think about it as the ongoing struggle between our ungrounded grandiosity that thinks it's the hero but never comes out, and the part of us that is able to see through everything.